Basically, I was super judgmental about stuff, and I was super wrong about a lot of books. I just feel like very, or turn, turn a blind eye to, or no, that's not the right phrase. But they can be of Henry. Hi everyone, it's Audrey and welcome back to Chapter and Converse. For today's video, I just kind of wanted to do like a discussion video, which I realize is strange when it's like a one-way talk of me talking to the camera. But I wanted to talk a bit about young adult, new adult books and reading, and kind of eat some of my own words, because I made some pretty big generalizations pretty early on about how I don't read YA and I don't read sci-fi, and I don't read fantasy, particularly YA fantasy, and kind of made some very bold, like, that's not me type of statements. And as I have evolved over the past year and being on BookTube, I have been kind of like so woken up in a way to so many different authors, not just in the YA new adults kind of sci-fi fantasy genre, but also with contemporary authors that I hadn't heard of. And I loosely say historical fiction. I know technically The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo is considered historical fiction, although I always seem to associate historical with like things that happened, like that are focused like solely on like things that happened in the 50s or the 1800s or something like that, which I know is completely ridiculous. But just books I don't think I ever would have picked up normally. I know I wouldn't have picked up normally. But what I really wanted to talk about today was, again, kind of backpedaling a little on some giant generalizations I made and some huge surprises I have had with books that I have picked up in the YA category. And also just like, it's so ridiculous when I think about how I was approaching reading a year ago. And I tend to kind of in all facets get super hyper focused on one thing and just sort of like live in it. And there was a time where I was like very hyper focused on chick lit, and I've always read mystery thriller, but I am usually just sort of like, oh, I read chick lit and I don't read anything else, and was very closed off to other books. And I definitely was in that mode for a while. And there are so many incredible books that are out there and so many incredible writers that are out there. And while I stand by the fact that not every YA book is for me, just like not every contemporary or thriller or historical or any, nonfiction fill in the blank is going to be for me, I have very much enjoyed trying things out that are new, and have surprisingly found, or I am surprised of what I have found in these books, and just sort of how eye-opening they have been, both in content and storyline and writing style and authors I have discovered, things I never thought I would enjoy that I am thoroughly just loving. And I wanted to just talk a bit about that today. So I was watching a video by Mara at Books Like Whoa, and I want to say she did like a Q&A or something like that, or she was responding to comments on her channel. And somebody had made a comment about how happy they were to have found her and to have found a channel that doesn't read like just YA books. And then they went on to say some pretty crap things about people who read YA. And she was offended by it. I completely understand why she was offended by it. And to be clear, I have never taken issue with YA. I always just felt I was too old at this stage of my life to be reading books that are targeted towards teens or early 20s, if we're talking about like new adult too. And this makes no sense on multiple levels, which I've talked about, because I die for high school drama on TV and in movies. And I am fully into Riverdale, and I watch The Perfectionists. You guys know I've talked about how I love Pretty Little Liars. I just started watching Nancy Drew. They are 1 year, they have just graduated high school, so they're all kind of in a gap year, but none of them went to college, so they're all like 18, 19. I feel like there's so many more. Why am I blanking? I just love high school stuff. I totally do. I watched it when I was in high school. I watched it when I was in college, and I've watched it ever since. But I am a complete sucker for those types of shows. I just am, and it just makes no sense about why I wasn't reading the books or why I stopped. And somewhere along the way this year, I don't know, I gave a book a go, and I don't even remember the first one that I read and what it was. But I started to trust booktubers that I have been following, and I started to dive deep down podcast holes, which I've talked about before, and started to kind of fall in love with these authors before I had even read any of their books, which made me more curious about their writing. And I find that having a connection on some level, either with a booktuber who's making a recommendation to me, or an author, or perhaps an author I already know and love who's making a recommendation on a book, has really benefited me in that it has given me an opportunity to not only just like hear about new books, but to take a risk on things and to pleasantly surprise myself. So I'm not specifically just saying like these are the only books, but one of the most surprising books, which I've talked about here, was Vicious by V.E. Schwab. And this is definitely like supernatural sci-fi. I guess it's like new adults, and I feel like I'm not even using all the terminology right, but the characters in this, it starts when they're in college. It winds up fast forwarding 10 years. So I think this is more like new adults than actual YA. There's such debate because you find this in the YA section of at least my Barnes & Noble, but I was so blown away by this book and the characters, and Victoria Schwab was one of those people. I listened to so many podcasts by her, her writing, her craft, how she approaches story, and then talking about her books, that I was like, I need to actually read what this woman writes because she's fascinating to me. And this book blew me away. I 5-star, loved this, devoured it in a matter of days, loved the characters. This is so far out of my comfort zone. And it blew me away. Her writing style, the relationships between the characters, sort of the action twists, the heightened what's happening, the flat out creativity. I have a tremendous amount of respect for her as a writer and as a creator. And it totally blew me away. And I have purchased, I have a little pile down here, so this is probably gonna get messy. And I've talked about this. I haven't read it yet, but I do have the sequel, Vengeful. And I was going to read it right afterwards, and then I didn't, and then I started to get into other things. But this is definitely a book I'd like to read before the end of the year. It introduces some new characters. We have some of our old friends and favorites from here. So I'm excited to read this. I have debated kind of like her Shades of Magic series and some other ones. I haven't taken a plunge on them yet. I don't want to assume everything's for me, but I also don't want to discount them. So she is definitely an author I never would have read that I'm thrilled I have. And then more recently, I picked up Truly Devious by Maureen Johnson, and the sequel, you're just gonna see the cover because the actual book is in my bedroom. Book 3 of this comes out in January. And this is a book that I had heard about from a lot of people, but again, felt like it was outside my age range, in the sense that, like, I talked about this with somebody at work. Several of the people on my team are sort of like right out of college, people who work for me at the host desk. And like this joke at work where I feel like I'm like Amy Poehler in Mean Girls. Every time I'm like around them and trying to talk to them about their weekends, we're like, I'm not like regular moms, like I'm a cool mom. And I feel like I am that person sometimes where like, am I trying to be like the cool mom by picking up the book that the kids are reading? But no, this is just, it's smart and clever and well written, and it's a good mystery, and it's a good read, and I don't feel like I'm too old or that I don't understand it. But at the same time, I don't feel like Maureen Johnson is writing characters who are not authentically high school students. So it's not like when Dawson's Creek first came out and they spoke like they were 20-somethings. Not that any of us spoke like that in our 20s even, but that they were less authentic teenagers because they were so hyper aware and they had such insane vocabularies, and it was just such a different sort of approach to the teen drama. But again, I mean, I devoured it. That's another one. Dawson's Creek, Buffy, all of it. Loved it all. But I don't feel like these are inauthentically high school students, but I also don't feel keenly aware that I am so old that I could have a high school student. So if that makes any kind of sense. But I completely loved this book, read it super fast, reading this as I film this video, and I'm excited for this one too, and I'm excited for book number 3, which comes out in January. So I'm excited for that. And then I also think, you know, from like a hard-hitting YA standpoint, books were not hard-hitting when I was a teen. And I mean, I remember reading the Sweet Valley High books, and I read Lois Duncan, and I enjoyed them all. I remember when 15 came out, and oh, how we passed that book around for the one kind of dirty scene that's in that book. And it was so risque at the time. But there was really nothing that was crazy hard-hitting and like really talking about tough issues. And I remember that book, Go Ask Alice, which at the time I feel like was a big deal, and it was anonymous, and it was supposed to be this girl who sort of had this horrible drug addiction. I want to say years later it was revealed that it was fiction and it wasn't anything true, and I think at the time we all believed it was, and that was sort of scandalous to me. But honestly, the most scandalous book I read as a teen was the Drew Barrymore biography, Little Girl Lost, which I have somewhere buried back behind me. I'm not going to pull everything apart, but she talked about, you know, her drug use starting at like 8 years old, and she was in rehab by the time she was 12. She was doing coke, she was smoking pot, she was drinking, she was partying, and then was in and out of rehab a couple times by the time she was 14. And I want to say this book came out when she was 14. And to me, that was like the most salacious book I had read, and it talked about things that other books were not talking about and that people weren't talking about. But I feel like now, in this day and age, there are so many incredible books out there for teens, and sort of like what a great time to be a teenager, but also as an adult to be able to read these books. And one of the books that comes to mind is Female of the Species by Mindy McGinnis. And Chelsea from Chelseadollingreads had talked about this book a lot on her channel, which is why I picked it up. And then I also discovered that Mindy McGinnis has her own podcast called Writer Pants on Fire, which I obsessively listen to, and I haven't listened to all of the episodes yet, but I'm working my way through them. And this is a very difficult book in content. It is also a very powerful book, and I think a very important book, and it talks about sexual assault and just dealing with loss and grief, and there's violence in it, and kind of wanting to get revenge and how you deal with that, and also the complications of relationships and friendships, and being who you are and figuring out who you are and being true to yourself, and just the complications of being anyone, whether you're 18 or 28 or 38 or 58 or 88, you know, and living an authentic life and dealing with all the horrible things that happen to you. And it's a very powerful book. It's not an easy book to read, but I think it's 100% a worthwhile read. And again, another one that completely blew me away. There's just so much content that I think is like impressive that it's out there, and that it's so accessible to people in a way that I don't think it was accessible when I was younger. And I also feel like I'm learning a lot from these books, which surprised me. Not that I think I know it all or that I can't relate, but that I am so affected by these stories regardless of how old the characters are in it. And, you know, as I sit and think about it, it shouldn't be any different if I'm reading a book about someone who's 20 years younger than me or someone who's 20 years older than me. And I think about, well, not YA, but, you know, talking about Evelyn Hugo, we follow her from when she is sort of a teen leaving New York up until present day when she's 80 years old. And I learned a ton about myself by reading that book, and being able to read characters at different stages of their life. Or, you know, you don't have to just, and this sounds so stupid and I don't actually believe this, but like, it's not that I can only relate to books that are about people who are my age, but I definitely judgmentally thought there's no way I can read YA because I'm not YA. So how could I possibly relate to these books? And I was wrong. I was just 100% wrong. And I continue to discover these authors and discover more books. And I'm at a stage now where I'm like yearning for them. And I'm in no way going to like abandon everything else I'm reading. It's about just reading more wide and more openly and more across genres, rather than, again, hyper-focusing into any one over the other, and paying far less attention to who a book is targeted towards and more attention to what the story's about. And I will say I have huge author loyalty. And if I, like I said, connect with an author in any way, and a lot of the podcasts I listen to are from a writing perspective and a craft perspective, and that's how I've discovered a lot of these authors, I'm going to pick up the book and I'm going to give it a go. And I'm happy about it. I know this sounds so silly, but I really feel like I gave, like I said, some really bad generalizations about my thoughts without being educated about sort of what the books are that are out there in the world right now, and really sort of like shut myself down to things. So some other books that have surprised me, I pulled some more off my shelf. Rules for Vanishing. Jeez. Kate Alice Marshall. This is a ghost story, kind of horror. Circle of friends goes into the woods, a path in the woods that opens once a year, and our main character is trying to find her sister who disappeared a year earlier, and they all go into the woods, and you just know something bad's gonna happen. So this is definitely love and friendship, but it is also horror and death and ghost story and Blair Witch Project-y. It's told very creatively with different media, with text messages, with police interviews, with medical interviews, with sort of a witness statement and transcriptions from videos and other things. So very well done. There's some chitter chatter I've heard about the ending, and I get why people say what they say about the ending, but I 100% think this is a worthwhile read, which, thank you, Julie Pages and Pens. Never would have picked this up without her. This Adventure Ends by Emma Mills is another Julie book that I devoured and loved, and I talked about this in the video where I reviewed it. The relationship, and I'm blanking on their names, which is awful, but between the daughter and father, and that is my favorite relationship since Keith and Veronica Mars. That is not a mystery book, though. That is just contemporary. Another one that I never would have picked up, Girls with Sharp Sticks, by Suzanne Young. This came from Mel to the Any, having recommended this. And Girls with Razor Hearts is coming out in 2020. This was also kind of sci-fi-ish. I feel like I'm not categorizing these right. It says it's a teen book, but this has some real kind of sci-fi elements to it. I know I'm not like giving these the right categories. This is a book I never would have picked up, but Mel talked about it really passionately, and I was super curious about it. It's kind of Handmaids-ish in that, yeah, so the near future girls-only private high school. So it focuses around this girl, Mina, and other girls that she's at the school with, and they're basically sort of being groomed to be the perfect girl, but everything is not as it seems, and they have been super sheltered in this existence, and they start to ask questions, and that's when things start to go awry, kind of in all the good ways. What are some other books that I read? Oh, The Naturals by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. That was another one from Mara at Books Like Whoa. It is sort of like teenage FBI type of thing, where this group of teens who have natural abilities are recruited to help solve cold cases with the FBI, but of course get roped into some live cases. And we see sort of like the teens getting to know one another, and then we also have the FBI agents who are sort of torn between needing them and envying them, because these students have the natural ability that these FBI agents lack and have been training for. That is a book that definitely has like some younger elements to it, but like I can sort of deal with the love triangle part of it. It's fine because I found it completely enjoyable, and that's the first in a series, and I need to read more of those. I did talk about Dress Codes for Small Towns, which is a book where I enjoyed a lot of it. There is a storyline in it, kind of a core storyline that I enjoyed, and a friendship and a revelation about, again, figuring out who you are. And then there was parts of it that made me hyper aware that I wasn't a 15-year-old girl. So that was a book that I kind of straddled both sides of it. And I had a more difficult time with that book, I would say, because I did feel like it was targeted more towards a younger audience, or else it was just something I couldn't necessarily connect with on all levels. But there was a lot of it that I also did enjoy. So that was sort of one that was like a little bit trickier, but I'm glad I read it. Trickier in sort of my review of it, because there were parts I enjoyed and parts that I just couldn't connect to. So it wasn't that it was bad, it just sort of like wasn't for me, I would say. So all of this to say, I made some really bad, judgy, not even comments, but just sort of, not even things that I've talked about on this channel, but some very broad statements of like, that's not for me, based on absolutely nothing. Or maybe a handful of books that I have read over the past few years that didn't strike a chord with me. And I mean, yes, after Gossip Girl came out, there's another high school show that I completely loved. I did read the first Gossip Girl book, and that was 100% not for me. I think the show was great. I think the show took it to another level. I think if I had read those books when I was younger, I would have enjoyed them more, but I felt hyper aware that I was older reading those books. The books I have mentioned here, all of these books, I have not been hyper aware of my age or the age of my characters. I have been lost in a really good story. And I think that's kind of the overarching lesson that I have learned over the past year is, you know, it's not about anything other than the story. And as I sit here and try and write my own story again, not like my life story, but like NaNoWriMo story, and the overarching advice of write what you want to read, I'm thinking about what appeals to me and what I want to read and what kind of stories I enjoy. And once again, I am pulled towards this dual timeline of writing life in college. And I had started in high school with this book, and I wound up growing them to college because I don't think some of the things that are happening could have made sense even at a private school if they were in high school. But I'm still fascinated by that age and that time in my life, and again still gravitate towards these types of TV shows and these types of stories. And I think great stories can be told at any age by an author of any age, and what matters is the story. So as I kind of look ahead to books that are coming out next year, or authors that I've discovered through these podcasts, or authors I've discovered through you guys, it's just, I'm going to sort of take the blinders off that I have had on and just explore every section of the bookstore and every section, you know, of Goodreads and every section of what people are reading. And one of the things I find so fascinating about all the booktubers that I watch is nobody singularly reads one specific genre and that's it. I think people have a certain appeal of a certain kind of book or a certain genre. I am certainly, you know, in love with thrillers, and that will always be the center, or I should say, I imagine that will always be the center of my reading universe because it's what I love. But I have seen so many different booktubers read so many different types of books, and that's how I've learned about so many of them. So thank you to all of you, and to people who comment down below and recommend books. Thank you to all of you for recommending books to me or encouraging certain books. Basically what I'm trying to say is all the books are fair game. So every book gets a shot. If the story is appealing to me, regardless of who it's targeted towards, what genre it's in, if it sounds appealing, I'm gonna give it a go. And I have been so pleasantly surprised with so many books. And outside of this young adult, new adult, sci-fi, fantasy kind of bucket here, I never would have read Beartown. I don't know that I would have picked up Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo had it not been for BookTube. So it's across all universes and genres. So a good story is a good story, and that is what I am focusing on. My focus going forward is just reading really good stories, and I'm not going to be preoccupied with who they're written for, what genre they're living in. If it sounds good to me, I want to give it a go. And that's the end of it. And I'm going to turn off the part of my brain that is going to think thoughts of, you know, that's not for me because I don't read horror. I never would have picked this up on my own. So I am so grateful that this was recommended to me. It surprised me in ways that I loved. It scared me in ways that I hated but loved. But it's just so important, I think, to just keep broadening my horizon. And one of the biggest things I always hear about in writing classes and craft classes is you have to read widely, period. You can't just read the genre that you write in. You can't just read the, you know, the handful of authors that you know and like. You have to read broadly. And even bad stories have lessons in them. And you never know where you're going to find something amazing. And I think it's true with TV shows. I think it's true with movies. I think any sort of creative content. And that's really what I've tried to stretch myself within over the past year. And my goal is to continue to stretch in the year to come, in the months to come. And there's so many books out there that I want to read, and there's so many authors I'm excited to explore. So I apologize for making any kind of snap judgment, broad stroke comments about any genres. And I was wrong. And I will admit when I'm wrong. And I was wrong about a lot of books. And I look forward to continuing to be surprised and to find new books and to continue to read great books by authors I've discovered. I think, you know, everyone, well, I haven't read Leigh Bardugo yet. I talked about this already. I picked up Ninth House. This is her first adult book. You know, and it's sort of like everyone has the right to change his or her mind. So she was writing YA, she is trying to break into adult and wants to distinguish herself in the adult market, which I get. So like, you go girl. Mindy McGinnis is another one. She is like, talk about like an inspiration. She writes across so many different genres, and she will not be pigeonholed into writing one type of book. And I think that freedom to do what you want to do and what feels right to you as a reader, as a writer, as a creator, whatever in life, you should do it. You should go for it. So this was not meant to be like a rah-rah kind of a speech, but I was thinking a lot about YA lately, and I was thinking a lot about things I had said early on in my channel that were just wrong. So I'm not changing anything. I'm not changing my content. I'm not changing who I am, or trying to force myself to be a certain kind of reader or a certain kind of booktuber or writer or any of that kind of stuff. But basically, as we come to the end of 2019 and I start to kind of reevaluate and reassess and look back, I had a little bit of an aha moment, and I wanted to share it with you guys. So let me know what you think. If you have been surprised by books, if you intentionally sort of avoid certain books, genres, topics, authors, any of it. If you've picked up something in any genre that you normally wouldn't have read that surprises you or has surprised you, or that really has kind of left an impact on you. Because I think at the end of the day, you know, good stories are good stories, and there's no arguing with that. And what appeals to me might not appeal to you, and vice versa. And that's also the beauty of it. We all get different things out of the stories based on our own personal experiences. I very much believe books serve you in a different way at certain times in your life and at certain places, and that's why some things appeal to you at certain times. And it's one of the reasons why I love to reread a book, because I continue to get more and more out of a lot of books. And then I had reread a few books this year where I was keenly aware that it doesn't relate to me anymore because I'm at a different stage in my life, but I can still appreciate what I got out of it when I read it at certain times in my life, if that makes sense. So anyway, I'm feeling very namaste right now, but thank you guys for watching and listening. I know this is kind of rambly and not really my usual stuff, but I just kind of wanted to talk a bit and rave about some books. But now I'm going to get back to it so I can get some stuff done and get some more words down on the page so I can go back and read this, because I need to read this because I want to read this. So I will see you guys next time around. Let me know how you're doing. Let me know what's going on. Thanks for watching and spending part of your day with me, and I will see you in the next one. I will see you in the next one. Bye guys.